We take a break from the law governing the handling of secret documents to focus on real animal law. One case in particular involving Lolita the Orca. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, that animals shouldn't be used for entertainment is one of PETA's main founding beliefs. But to stay true to that often takes complicated legal proceedings that can take years or decades to resolve. That's the case of Lolita, who has been living in the orca equivalent of a phone booth that's cruel and unusual for more than 50 years. Habeas orcas? Join me as Jared Goodman, General Counsel Animal Law for the PETA Foundation, discuss the matter of Lolita, an orca yearning to be free, on the PETA Podcast.
Lolita remains at the Miami Seaquarium, where she's been since 1970, when she was just a few years old and had been captured from her family in the wild off the coast of Washington State and moved to the Miami Seaquarium, where she has now been for about 53 years. And she has been held in the same tank the entire time. It is the smallest orca tank in the world, and we firmly believe does not meet even the bare minimum size required by the Federal Animal Welfare Act.
You say it's such a small tank, such a tiny tank. It's hard to believe that anyone has been in that same place for 53 years. How can that be?
It really is amazing, especially because it truly is that as small as you're describing. So Lolita is 20 feet long, and this tank is 80 feet long at its longest point, and she's held in a portion that's about 80 by 35. So, at most she can go a few body lengths in any direction. And the tank is only 20 feet deep at its very deepest point. And again, she's 20 feet long. So she has no real opportunity to dive. She can't swim any meaningful distance. All she's left to do is really sit there listlessly or swim in endless circles. And so we have been campaigning for a very long time for her to be moved out of that decrepit facility, and as have many others for decades. And so it's incredible that Lolita has been able to survive in this tank for as long as she has. She is one of the longest living captive orcas, and the fact that she is still there really shows her resiliency and that she really could be a great candidate to be relocated from there and moved to a coastal sanctuary.
Tell us about who Lolita is and why she's special as an orca.
So Lolita was taken from the southern resident orca population off the coast of Washington State in 1970. And this population is critically endangered. There are fewer than 70 members of it right now. And that is in part because of the wild captures for public entertainment and amusement parks. Places like SeaWorld and the Miami Seaquarium effectively obliterated the population of the southern residents. So coupled with other issues like food availability and shipping noise and all of these other man-made effects that threaten our wildlife, capturing the orcas to put them in tanks really decimated the population. So Lolita was taken from her family and was moved to this tank. And she, we believe, could very well remember her family. After she was in captivity for a couple of decades, others came to her tank with recordings from the wild southern resident orcas and played them to her. And she clearly responded to them and appeared to still recognize their calls, even after being held in that tank for so many years. So this population, they're just incredibly intelligent animals. They have a form of culture that is unrivaled by any species other than humans. They have group-specific dialects that they pass down through the generations. They have group-specific hunting behaviors and other behaviors that they teach each other and then pass down to their children. So it truly is recognized as a form of culture. And so it's particularly devastating to an animal like that when they are stripped of all of that and placed in a barren tank for the rest of their life.
So if people visit Lolita now at the Seaquarium and see her, what are they seeing, and how does she react to human beings who come in? They pay the cost of admission. They look at her and then they move on. What is she feeling? What is her reaction to the stream of people who come to see her?
Well, interestingly, there is no longer a stream of people that come to see her because she's not allowed to be held on public display anymore. As of last year, after all of these years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which administers the Federal Animal Welfare Act, was tasked with renewing the license for the Miami Seaquarium, and it only renewed the license after carving out Lolita, the Pacific white-sided dolphin who was held with her, Lee, and their tank from the exhibitor's license. So that means the only way that the USDA was going to license the Miami Seaquarium is if the Miami Seaquarium was no longer exhibiting Lolita, because her tank is so woefully inadequate and does not meet the bare minimum standards of the Animal Welfare Act. So since that time, she hasn't been on display to the public.
So if that's the case, though, why don't they just let her go? If they can't display her in their, to satisfy their need, she is of no use to them. Why don't they just let her free?
Well, that leads us to the really great news that in March of this year, the Miami Seaquarium confirmed that it is actually planning to release Lolita to a seaside sanctuary in approximately 18 to 24 months. The timing depends on quite a few things, but this has been done in conjunction with a group that was created called Friends of Toki and made possible with the generosity of philanthropist Jim Irsay, the owner and CEO of the Indianapolis Colts. So right now they are working on plans to develop a sanctuary in her home waters and also working on training her to get accustomed to the sling that she would need to be put in, to be moved from her tank, and getting her health up to par such that she can be safely moved. And so the plans are in motion to finally get her back home after all these years.
That's good news. Of course, she's going to be free, but still there's something that seems strange that it took so long. Or is this the normal transition once you go from being in this kind of captivity to allowing her to be free?
Well, she should have never been captured from her family, but she should have been released decades ago when the public began to so strongly call for it, when we began to realize and science supported the extent to which these animals are suffering in barren concrete tanks. And so the only reason why we've gotten to this point now is in part because of the USDA's decision to not license her tank, so she no longer can be a moneymaker for the Miami Seaquarium, but also the facility was sold from Palace Entertainment to the Dolphin Company, and the CEO of the Dolphin Company came into this arrangement with the knowledge that everyone wanted to see Lolita moved, and so between that and their hand effectively being forced by the USDA's decision, he has been fully on board and is 100% committed, which is a quote, to moving Lolita. So it really was the change of ownership and the fact that the USDA finally held the facility responsible for these conditions that led to the change now.
Still, it just seems a kind of a mixed blessing that it took so long, because the living conditions there, they had to have had an ongoing impact to her health. I mean, she's been there for 53 years, but when she continues to live there, she's not of use to Seaquarium. She's being hidden. it's almost like, well, it's bad. Let's free her.
Absolutely. And really, as soon as she was no longer on public display, this became the most likely option. But it takes some time to prepare her for the move because of how long she has been there and because of the effects that she suffered from being in that tank. She hasn't had to catch live fish or really move meaningfully in all that time. So it takes some time to train her, to get her body up to shape, to get her mind ready, to be able to have such a huge change after being in this just concrete cell for so long.
What's her life expectancy? What do they project? I mean, she's been there 53. She's how old now, and how much longer do you think she'd have if she were free? And would it extend her life?
So she's about 57 years old now. We don't know exactly how old she was when she was captured, but she was estimated to be 4 based on her size and her family. She could live for many more decades. So it's actually recognized in the scientific literature that the estimated lifespan for females could be 80 years and potentially longer from this particular population. So while people point to the fact that she is one of the longest surviving captive members of the species, the fact is that because this is a long-lived species, if she lived in adequate conditions, then she could live far longer. And that's exactly what the expectation is for this sanctuary when she has the enrichment of being back in the ocean and not being forced to remain in this filthy, decrepit tank, that she will truly have the opportunity to thrive for the first time since 1970, and that will extend her life.
Has she been hurt by being away for so long? I mean, some people, to use a human example, people say, they've come to America and then they have to go back to their home country. And they say, I don't know anybody. I don't know. I don't have the same appreciation for the culture I came in. Is there something similar to that with orcas? Could she just fit in, or would she be seen as an intruder within her own culture?
It's a great question, because you're absolutely right that those are issues that need to be dealt with. And that's part of the reason why she would not just be released back into the open ocean to hopefully get along with the other southern residents. She has been confined for far too long to make that transition so suddenly, which is why she will be put in a sanctuary environment that is netted in, where she can continue to work with the same people she's been working with for many years, receive the same level of care, both husbandry and veterinary care, and get everything she needs from us, while also beginning to readapt to living in her natural environment. And in terms of sort of interspecies relationships, she would be moved with the dolphin who's currently been in her tank for many years. So she would have him as a companion. And then she would also have the opportunity to potentially interact with other members of the southern residents through the barrier of the sanctuary. And really only if she was truly thriving and showed every sign that she would be able to be reintroduced just to the wild environment would she ever be released from the sanctuary. And there's no plan for that to happen, but it's certainly on the table if everything points to it as being appropriate for her and for the surrounding environment.
Now, this has to be a kind of model for all orcas who've been in captivity who transition back, I imagine, although this would be a special case because she's been in captivity for 53 years.
Yes, absolutely. This is a sign that SeaWorld and every other captive facility should be doing the same thing. It's not the first time that a cetacean or even an orca has been released to sanctuary. Many dolphins have been taken from marine parks and been able to thrive in sanctuaries. And then beyond that, there's also Keiko, known as Free Willy, who thrived in both the sea pen and the open ocean for 5 years before he died. Opponents of Lolita's move like to point to Keiko as saying, oh, he died ultimately. But the fact is that he was rehabilitated and truly thrived in the sanctuary and even was able to swim in the open ocean before, after 5 years, he ultimately died of pneumonia, which, by the way, several orcas died at SeaWorld of pneumonia during that same time period. But regardless, again, no one is advocating right now for Lolita to be released. And there's no question that Keiko thrived in the sanctuary and that Lolita should also.
Tell me about PETA's involvement. Tell me about the lawsuits that have brought us to this place.
We've been actually litigating on Lolita's behalf for a decade now. Back in 2012 was when we had first submitted a formal complaint to the USDA, encouraging them or urging them to not renew the Miami Seaquarium's exhibitor's license because of the fact that her conditions don't meet the minimum standards of the law. And they went ahead and did it anyway. And we sued over that. And the situation with, at the time, for USDA licenses was that you obtain one when you first open your facility. And then every year you submit a 1-page renewal application that would be rubber stamped by the agency and a new license issued. This application also required a certification that your facility was in compliance with the law. Our argument, of course, was that they were not in compliance with the law. And when they submitted this application, the agency was aware that the conditions did not meet the requirements. And yet, regardless, it rubber stamped that license application over and over again. And the federal courts ultimately held that the USDA had the authority to do this. It could ignore all of the evidence before it and simply rubber stamp these applications. And it was allowed to do that because even though a facility must be in compliance with the law when a license is issued to it, the statute, the Animal Welfare Act itself, doesn't say anything about renewals. It just says when the license is issued. So even though the agency reissues the license every year as part of the renewal process, the court said it was a reasonable interpretation of the law that only when the initial license is issued does the USDA have to ensure that the facility is in compliance, and then it can do whatever it wants with each renewal every year for all eternity.
Lolita really needed a human advocate, and PETA was it.
Yes, absolutely. And this was the start of it. So there was that lawsuit. And then the situation changed quite a bit because the facility was then sold from its first owner and longtime owner to Palace Entertainment. And that was about 2015, 2016. And licenses do not transfer to a new owner of a facility. So there was no more rubber stamping renewal at issue. A new license had to be issued to the Seaquarium's new owner. So we wrote to the agency and said, you cannot license this facility because of all of the same reasons. And they went ahead and did it anyway. So we sued again. The lower court stood by the prior decision, even though we weren't dealing with renewals anymore, and granted the USDA's motion to dismiss our lawsuit. But last year, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Florida agreed with us and held that because this wasn't a renewal and the agency did issue a new license, it was required to ensure compliance with the law. And so it kicked the case back down to the lower court. And it's actually still pending now. I think it's maybe been 5 years or 6 years since it was initially filed. It's just the wheels of justice sometimes move very slowly. Fortunately, in the meantime, we have come to where we are with these plans in motion to move Lolita, regardless of what the USDA does.
Regardless of the lawsuit, just on the commerce side, because the ownership has changed hands, you've got now an enlightened owner who has circumvented and said, okay, I'm going to take care of this and move forward to benefit Lolita.
That's right. And we think that certainly our lawsuits played a role in that because the USDA, we have every reason to think, wouldn't have carved out Lolita from the license, would have just licensed Lolita and allowed her to be on display if it didn't know that it had already faced 2 lawsuits about this and would undoubtedly face a third if it licensed her again. So I think that absolutely played a role. But those were not the only things that PETA has done. We also successfully petitioned the National Marine Fisheries Service to remove its unlawful exclusion of Lolita from the Endangered Species Act listing of the southern resident orcas. So in 2005, the agency listed the southern residents as endangered, which gave them the protections that endangered animals receive. But it carved out Lolita from that. It said all of the southern residents except those in captivity at the time of listing. And that was only Lolita. It was intended only to deprive her of those protections. And that's illegal. So we petitioned the government and successfully got them to reverse that and provide her with Endangered Species Act protections. Unfortunately, the government does not enforce the Endangered Species Act with respect to captive animals virtually ever. But there is a citizen suit provision in that law that allowed us to pursue it. So we did sue the Miami Seaquarium under the Endangered Species Act, and that lawsuit, while ultimately unsuccessful, revealed a great deal of detailed information about the manner in which she was suffering in her tank, the illnesses that she suffered, that she would sit for hours on end listlessly in her tank with really nothing to do, that she was repeatedly abused and mobbed by the other dolphins who were held with her, who would scrape their teeth on her skin so severely that sometimes she would need to be medicated with antibiotics to prevent infection. So we exposed all of this through our lawsuit, and I similarly think that that information helped support the public outcry and lead to where we are now with the dolphin company being willing to move her.
Just the legal history of Lolita is kind of a model for what to or not to do in animal rights law, or how to follow the path to get to justice in animal rights.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are just so many impediments to actually obtaining relief for animals because of agencies not doing their jobs, or courts sometimes being unwilling to reach a result that's beneficial for animals for any number of reasons we don't need to go into. But there are so many hurdles along the way, and that's why it is so important to continue pushing, setting great precedent that could then be used in future cases.
And so really the new owners again, the dolphin company?
That's right.
And is there one specific person at the dolphin company that is really stepped in and should be seen as a kind of hero here?
Eduardo Albor is the dolphin company's CEO, who has been on board with this plan, as far as we know, since he began taking interest in the facility. He describes in the press conference where they announced this initiative for Lolita that before the sale was finalized, he and his adult daughter went to the Seaquarium and watched a Lolita show, and she was crying during it and had to leave and explain to him why it was so upsetting. And really at that time, he said he realized that he needed to do something and he couldn't just keep her there. But I do think also that the USDA's decision finally not to license that tank played a large role in getting to where we are now.
It's amazing how, there's laws, and then there was the carve out, and then, that both in the end benefited Lolita, but at the beginning hurt her, which triggered the lawsuit that PETA filed. That it would seem that, there's a law, but if you want the law to move in your direction or in your way, people can carve out or carve around the law and make exceptions.
Yeah, the agency, unfortunately, will very often do what it can to support the licensed party, the exhibitors, the people who are abusing animals. For quite a while, actually, the USDA was referring to licensed parties as customers, and that customer service was the most important aspect of their job. So they weren't viewing these as regulated entities where they need to strictly enforce the law. And that's a problem. And I think, at least with respect to marine parks and maybe a couple other facilities, we're maybe seeing that soften a little bit. But certainly the agency is not a watchdog. It does take groups like PETA to really push these issues to make meaningful change.
So we have good news in that the new owner is going to go through with this. In the meantime, Lolita is being prepared for her sanctuary existence. What is the earliest time again that we could see Lolita in a seaside sanctuary? And tell us more about the kind of life she could look forward to.
It's difficult to give a particular timeline for it. The groups that announced the move said that they're hoping it will be on the 18 to 24 month timeline. This really depends in large part on how quickly they are able to sort out all of the permitting issues with the relevant federal and state agencies, because moving an endangered animal into an environment off the coast of a state where there's an existing ecosystem, there are other endangered and threatened animals. They just need to ensure that these are things that it's not going to jeopardize her. It's not going to jeopardize the surrounding environment. So this needs to be shown to the satisfaction of government entities, which I am confident that the experts involved are best positioned to establish that. And then this will be able to happen. And I think the expectation is certainly that whenever those permitting issues are cleared up, she'll be ready to go.
And when it does happen, it'll be, I guess, Lolita will notice 1,000% it'll be better than her current situation.
Absolutely. So in a seaside sanctuary, which is usually a netted off cove or bay, she would have the opportunity to swim farther distances than the tiny tank that she's in now, the opportunity to dive deeper than a single body length, to interact with other ocean animals, to feel the currents, and really just be in the ocean and everything that has to offer, instead of being in a tank with chemically treated water that is, frankly, that's crumbling, and is not even safe for people to be at right now. So it will just be a world of difference for her. And every expert who has opined on this honestly, and does not kowtow to the industry, has confirmed that this is really her only opportunity to thrive. She's not going to be able to in that tank ever, but she truly can in a sanctuary environment.
Jared, as Lolita's lawyer, have you ever seen her? Have you ever, seen her in person?
I have. I've spent quite a bit of time at the Seaquarium observing her. And it's shocking how you see photos and video of her in that tank and you think it's small, but it's so much worse when you see it in person. You really can just appreciate how much she is deprived of, especially if you've also had the pleasure, like I have, of seeing her wild cousins in the ocean off the coast of Washington and San Juan Island, where they're swimming long distances together in pods. Her to have any semblance of that is something to absolutely celebrate. And we very much look forward to her proceeding with this move.
When you see her, are you able to communicate with her?
I think there's no question that she does communicate with humans. I have not done that with her. I was just a spectator there, but she develops relationships with her caregivers, certainly, just as a socially complex and intelligent animal. Even though it's great for her to have specific relationships, be friends with other orcas, and that's truly necessary for her to really exhibit all of her natural behaviors and live like an orca. Captive animals also do develop relationships with their caretakers, and sometimes that's helpful to them, sometimes it's to their detriment. But here particularly, the relationships that she's developed will be helpful because those people will be there with her in Washington State to help ease her into the transition to the new environment.
And I imagine if she did communicate with you, then you would be under pressure to honor client lawyer privilege.
Yes, it's attorney-client privilege. I can't divulge it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. But I'm glad she's happy. She's happy. She's definitely happy.
I think so. I think she knows. She knows that things are looking up for her. As it is, since Friends of Toki and the Dolphin Company became involved. They have improved the tank a bit. That is in part because of USDA citations, but the water quality, all of the systems that the tank has to maintain water quality have been updated and improved to help make it as basically as decent as it can be while she still needs to be there.
Barring unforeseen circumstances, I mean, there's no turning back now. I mean, they can't say, oh, we've made it nice for her. Now we want to keep her. That's not going to happen, right?
There's no expectation that it is, because frankly, the tank itself needs updates that they can't do while she is in it. So that's also why it's important for her to get out of there. If she's going to be moved from the tank, she might as well be moved to the environment that she should be in instead of another swimming pool somewhere else.
Jared Goodman, General Counsel, Animal Law for the PETA Foundation, on Lolita the Orca and how the battle for her freedom could be over soon. She could be in sanctuary sometime in 2024. Go to PETA.org for updates on Lolita. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Or get this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.